I have a wonderful electronic invention I want you to see. It looks something like this.
Welcome to the CTO Studio. I am your host, Etienne de Bruin. CTO Studio is where we chat with CTOs building amazing products, building incredible teams. Have you chatted with a CTO lately? Today, very special show because we have Michael Saul, .com. Michael is the co-founder of 7 CTOs. He is a friend, partner, mentor, challenger, adventurer. And we're going to spend a bit of time talking about who knows where this is going to take us.
I love it.
First thing I want to know is, do you have any questions for me? Got you. Michael Saul, what is emotional intelligence?
Wow. Okay. So it's a way of viewing an aspect of who we are as human beings and measuring our capacity in our own ability to, number one, become aware of the emotional side of our lives, and to, in an ideal scenario, ideal situation, get ourselves into a position where we stay in an optimal balance between our cognitive thinking side of our personality and our emotional, relational side of our personality.
Because oftentimes when I feel like I'm getting emotional, I feel like I have to flee from it, or it's not a good thing. Emotional intelligence says, you know what, you're emotional and that's okay, but what are my tools to be able to be self-aware, socially aware?
Yeah. A way to think about it is, as a man growing up in the United States, the first half of my life, so the first 30 plus years of my life, I could recognize 2 or 3 emotions, and that was it. Anger, frustration, and excitement, however they showed up. And when you become aware of the fact that you're angry, for example, what's interesting about that is when you're in that emotional state, you can only see 2 or 3 different options for how to move forward that are all kind of brought forth because you recognize this emotion of anger, okay? If you can get to a place in your life where you start asking yourself, oh, I'm angry, but what's underneath the anger? And all of a sudden you can identify, well, I was surprised, caught off guard, frustrated by that, maybe even hurt by that. Then all of a sudden, when I'm aware of the fact that I'm underneath the anger as the primary emotion is this sense of hurt and confusion, and or maybe even some fear, then all of a sudden my options for how I'm going to respond become very different and more prolific than just the 1 or 2 options that existed when I was angry.
That is so true. Something that tech people love to do, and by implication CTOs, is reverse engineer. And so reverse engineer, giving yourself the time and space to reverse engineer how I got to this place.
That's a great way to look at it. That's
another tool that I use, which I think I made up myself, is when I feel agitated or I'm struggling at work, with my relationships, with my devs, my CEO, I ask myself, when was the last time everything felt okay? And then my brain can go to, well, you know what? Yesterday morning, I remember feeling totally fine. And then last night, I felt totally fine. But for some reason, this morning, I felt agitated with my CEO.
Yeah.
And then once you've defined that point in time, you can then say, well, what was it that took me from, and then you can't find it, you keep reverse engineering, and then you realize that you had a quick look at your emails when you woke up, and you're kind of stuck on one email that you saw. Boom.
What you're describing is so powerful. And it leads to that second part of the emotional intelligence framework. The first part is identifying your emotions, right? Which, as I just said earlier, has an impact of giving you more options of what to do. But the second part is managing your emotions. And when you realize you actually have much more control over your emotional state, another whole set of opportunities opens up for you. And when I say that, I don't just mean control as in stuff it or not be emotional. I actually mean the opposite. It's how do I make use of my emotional control of my emotional state. So, for example, an experience that I have, my wife and I kind of joke about is, when we kind of get stuck in this belief that we can't control our emotions, we just think back to these moments and times in our own relationship where my wife is really upset about some boneheaded thing that I did, and she's just let me have it. Michael, I can't understand why you did that. This just makes no sense to me. And she's really intense into this feeling. And then all of a sudden the phone rings. She pauses, she stops, and she goes, "Oh, hi, how are you? God, I can't wait to talk to you. I'm really excited about us getting together. Okay, great. I'll call you tomorrow." She hangs up. "Now, Michael, let's get right back to the..."
Wow.
Yeah, exactly. And it's a fallacy that we don't really have control over our emotions.
I was recently in South Africa, and I was listening to an interview with a psychologist, and I think she was a child psychologist, and she was reflecting on how from a young age you're told that the emotion that you're experiencing shouldn't be experienced. So when the kid comes and says, "Mommy, I'm afraid," then the mommy says, "Don't be afraid."
Exactly. Yep.
And I just thought that was amazing that from a young age we are ingrained with not really embracing our emotion.
Right.
But
We're told that our emotions are wrong.
Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's fascinating.
And it's exactly the wrong thing to do.
So you have a rich and illustrious history, ranging from navigating rivers to flying, right?
Yeah.
To coaching, working with some of the Fortune 500 companies,
Yeah, Fortune 200. Yeah,
and obviously being surrounded in many ways, or surrounding high-level CEOs and C-suites and execs. The question I want to get to is kind of how you've seen the growth of the role of CTO in these companies, and how they come to terms with this fairly new role that's emerging as technology and innovation is consuming even large companies. But before we get to that, why don't you just give us a quick flyby of how we got to this place, you and I?
Okay, great.
Started in Oregon.
So yeah, I'll characterize it this way. I was a very good student in high school, but somewhere between high school and college, the rebel side of me kicked in big time. And I went to a university which was an alternative school, completely radically different approach to education, which I'm very excited about today because that philosophy is now kind of the emerging philosophy in what we call the flipped classroom and rather than studying in very narrow fields of study, we actually learn how to solve problems and learn how to get curious, and then can drill down based upon what we need to know in order to solve that problem. And in that world, I really started to question, well, instead of who is it, what do I need to do for the rest of my life? What career am I going to pick? What am I going to become? Because that was the pressure and kind of the conventional wisdom back in the late 60s and early 70s. I flipped that question to, well, what is it I really love doing? And so the answer to that question was I loved being out of doors and doing adventurous kinds of things. And so I actually dropped pre-med and went into outdoor education and everything kind of surrounding this whole exploration of the human spirit in that adventurous context. Started my first business at the age of 20, which was a whitewater rafting business, and took people on whitewater experiences all over the western United States, and had a hardshell kayak school, which was where things got really interesting because we were teaching the Eskimo role and how to individually, rather than in a big raft with a guide or even with a group of people paddle boating, it's just you and your boat navigating some pretty tough and adventurous scenarios. And I know now, looking back on it, that was my first exposure into a laboratory of human behavior, especially when confronted with fear. And interestingly enough, when I would have a kayak student who was, some professional athlete, we had a lot of professional athletes that came to the kayak school for whatever reason, and this guy's pulled over to the side of the river, quietly by himself, and there's a few tears coming down his cheeks, and he's very frustrated, and he's ready to quit. And I've got my boat up right next to him, and we're having this little private conversation. And my motivation at the time is, oh my God, I got to keep him from dropping out of the kayak school because I don't want to refund his money. When the real conversation was guiding him through this process of facing into his fear. He's feeling like a failure. It's not his image to be scared in a situation like this. He's a professional athlete. He's very successful. And then here he is in this different aspect of life where he's confronting something and he's reverted all the way back to his primal fear and sense of failure. And the ability to work through that, to feel that, to understand that, to use that, to work through that, was an experience we were having, 4 or 5 times every week over the course of the whole season. And it became the first place where I really started to understand both this aspect about human nature and my excitement and energy and interest in that human experience and being there with people as they go through that experience. Then I got the opportunity to actually experience a form of fear firsthand, because what happened is that business was just a summer business. I expanded it to 2 other businesses that would operate in the winter season, one down in Baja running sailing trips and another in Jackson Hole, Wyoming running ski trips. And all of a sudden at the age of about 28, 29, I've got this, cool little group of small companies, and I'd gotten into flying, and I became a pilot, and I got an airplane, and I'm flying to Wyoming and then down to Baja and back up to Oregon, and met the woman, the love of my life, who was soon to become my wife, and life is awesome. And then the company in Wyoming got in trouble, and long story short, it led to bankruptcy and complete collapse of all 3 businesses. And all of a sudden, at the age of 30, I'm destitute, I'm broke, I'm declaring bankruptcy, I'm moving from the Pacific Northwest to Los Angeles, because in 1980, 81, it was one of the only 3 cities in the United States where there was still some kind of a healthy economy and you could get a job. And now I'm facing into that same fear and loss of control and belief that I've failed, that I had been the guide and the coach for everybody else on for the last, the previous 9 or 10 years. So you never know where it's going to hit you. And just because you've mastered all these other domains or areas of life doesn't mean that there isn't one out there somewhere that's still going to present you with the opportunity to face into those issues themselves.
In that scenario, just quickly, what do you think was the dominant force? Was it the way you viewed yourself, or was it the concern you had how others viewed you?
Oh, that's a great question. I think the honest answer for me was both. For sure, I was concerned how others viewed me because at that point in my life, I viewed myself through those lenses. In other words, who I was the manifestation of the work I did and the position I commanded as a result of the work I did, et cetera, et cetera. So in those businesses, I didn't make a lot of money, but I lived an incredible lifestyle. And the businesses paid for everything. And so I'm living in, beautiful lodge that I own in the wilderness, and I've got an airplane, and I can travel, and I can do all the exploration I want to do. I don't have very much money in the bank, but my image of who I was success and independent and cool and all of that. And I definitely was in a place in my own understanding of who I was that was my measure of who I was.
Isn't it amazing how great it feels to be the envy of other people?
Oh, of course. It's so easy to get sucked into. It's so interesting when you become a parent and you have kids that when your kids are successful, it's real easy to say, well, that's because of me and it's because of us and because of what we've taught them and where we live and the lessons we've been teaching them. But then when they go out there and they suck and they fail and they do things that in their own exploration that aren't the kinds of things that we want to reflect, it's like, am I a failure as a parent too? It's like you either have to detach from that and say, I do the best I can, I protect them, and then I have to, move in and roll into this role of being their coach and their guide. But they are who they are, and they're still accountable for their decisions. And I don't get to take credit for their successes, and I don't take credit for their failures either. I just do the best.
Even though when they do fail, it affects how other people view you.
Oh, of course.
And that,
of course.
I was in a situation yesterday in my role as a CTO where there's a certain problem we can't solve, and I found someone else who is a product manager recommend to me how we solve the problem. And I had an interesting array of emotions about that. I was, well, wait a minute, how are they viewing me? And that's actually a great idea. Why didn't I think of that? Oh my goodness, how are they how am I failing right now? And it's a really gross feeling.
Yeah.
Because you can't just shake it off. You got to go to a very different place to shake those things off, which is rooted in your self-image.
That's exactly. Well, it's rooted in the lesson I got to learn at that point in time, which is I am not my image. My image of who I'm projecting myself to be in the world may be in alignment with who I am, but it may not be. And really finding the time or taking the time to explore, well, who am I really? And what is my real value that I bring to my time here on the planet? And learning to, not just accept that, but fall in love with yourself and who you are, and start to have an appreciation for who you are, completely separate from all of the external manifestations of who we think we are. That's absolutely key. Because then you're living when you can tap back into that, you're living in a world where you're already all you need to be. You're already as successful as you will ever need to be. You're already complete. And when you can when you can be experiencing life through that perspective or understanding of who you are, then all kinds of options open up. And you're not limited to just those choices that you saw or those emotions that you would experience if you're still hooked to your image of who you think you need to be
and
to
is that,
please other people.
Is that identity issues?
Yeah, I just simply call it getting to really know yourself, your authentic self, understanding really who you are at the core authentically, and accepting all the parts of you, the good and the bad, the parts of you that, if you're a parent or a husband in a relationship and your spouse or your kids are threatened, there's an instinct in there somewhere to go to protection and even contemplate doing things that outside of this sense of threat you would never in a million years even think about doing. Well, that's a part of who you are that's very real that we often want to disassociate ourselves from and not accept. So part of getting to know who you are includes getting to know all of who you are and being okay with
because
all of
I
that.
feel and kind of going to your role as a coach and as a management consultant, I find that oftentimes as business people, as executives, as founders, we're living in a gap, and that is the gap between how I feel about myself and how I want others to view me. And so we're constantly in this deficit mode of, well, I need more reassurance that the product we're building is going to be adopted by the market.
Right.
But I want them to view me as the confident CTO. So now you're constantly in this gap of just not feeling great. And what's even worse is all the decisions that you make inside of that gap, as opposed to having this, what you talk about, this sense of fulfillment about knowing, but hang on, me being true to myself is questioning the product roadmap or the plans, and me questioning that is not a detriment to any person.
Absolutely.
It's just me being true to my identity.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's that sense of that you just described a minute ago of your own questioning and your own self-doubt about, geez, am I making all the right decisions? Can I really deliver on the things that I've either promised or said I could do or set us all out to go conquer? Can be a very lonely place when we are constantly measuring ourselves again from based on the outside factors. And there are two roles in particular in today's business model where that is very, very prominent. And one of them is the role of the CEO. And so it doesn't matter what industry you are, if you're playing the role of primary head of the organization, and your job is to help identify the vision and take us in that direction and measure the risk that we're going to assume in our quest to conquer our goals. That can at times be a very lonely place. And a lot of the work that my wife and I would do in CEO membership groups was basically to create the atmosphere where the CEOs could share in front of each other their sense of fear and loneliness at the self-doubt that can creep in around, oh my God, I've got all these people organized to charge off in this direction because I have, displayed all this confidence that this is the right way to go. And what if I don't know what the hell I'm talking about? That's a very, very real dynamic. Well, it's equally as true for the CTO role. The CTO role is this wonderfully exciting, high-profile role where maybe in some cases you've taken more of that weight on your shoulders than even the CEO has. Because you're the one, at the top of the food chain in terms of building the product and actually executing on this promise. And many times we're building things that have never been built before. We're never, tackled quite this way before. And so the the product or service we're building may also be, because it's never been done before, is also challenging marketing, and it's challenging sales, and it's challenging support, because we got to build all these other systems to support this new thing that are also in new territory as well. So what we're doing over here is having an impact on everybody in the organization. And it's equally as scary. It can have those scary moments associated with it. And yet, because it's such a new position, and many of us who find ourselves in that kind of role have never had that kind of exposure before. We didn't go down the CEO path. We may or may not have gone down the entrepreneurial path. So this might be a first for us. And yet the role itself kind of thrusts us into that same dynamic. So it's crucially important for the person playing this CTO role that they do that same exploration that we used to take the CEOs through.
So as we're, you and I are obviously building this fantastic organization called 7 CTOs. And your role is sort of the mastermind behind our forum structure, our forum infrastructure, and really giving us all a platform to share much of what you just talked about. What are you picking up? What are your observations about CTOs? I know we talk to CTOs, hundreds within and outside of our organization. So not even within 7 CTOs, but just in general, what are you seeing? What are the top things that come to mind for you?
You bet. Well, first of all, I'm going to say that when we first got together and you first came to me and proposed that together with your experience and your network and your intimate understanding of the world of the CTO and my experience in coaching and development and personal growth and emotional intelligence, that we had the right chemistry to create an experience for this community. You were dead on. Man, oh man. And I will be honest in saying that I have been a little bit surprised and totally tickled that the CTO community has found what we offer to be so valuable and so exciting that they're jumping in with both feet. And I didn't expect that. I expected that a much stronger sense of skepticism and prove to me that you have value here, and why should I really go down this learning to be a better leader path or this emotional intelligence path, or why should I be sharing with my fellow peers some of my fears that come with this role. And what I've discovered is that it's not just about the fact that you were right, that there's a huge opportunity and need there, but that we've been watching people blossom. I mean, it's been so rewarding to be a part of this process where they're already so talented, they're already so driven, they're already so smart. Just giving them some fuel and putting them together in the right arena and with some good process, man, they're just taking off like you can't believe. And I'm so excited about it because the in the economic conditions that are existing today in the world of technology, especially, it's a very hot place to be, and there's a ton of opportunity. And we've even seen in our short period of time that our CTOs are, changing opportunities, sometimes every 2 or 3 years, and there's no lack of opportunity for them. So they don't miss a beat for very long, moving from one startup to the next, or from one enterprise into the next enterprise. But every time they do that, they go in with so much more talent and capacity and experience. So they're on this accelerated path, and it's very gratifying for them to then, they stay with us even in that interim. They don't miss their membership, even if they have to take care of it on their own, because this is their brotherhood and sisterhood. This is where they're going to have a community of people that they can rely on. And it's not the typical transactional network. It's much deeper and much more meaningful to them. And now we're in this place where they're wanting to give back. And so we're kind of transitioning to this place where all we have to do is start tapping into their desire to want to give back. And that's expanding at another whole level the value that this community can start to provide to itself and to people outside the community who might be interested in peeking in and seeing what's going on.
Yeah, one of the dreams I have, and which we share, is the scientific community generally isn't collaborative.
That's an understatement.
So it's all about this rush to, publish this paper or keep your findings to yourself so you could achieve some sort of goal. I'm not saying it's necessarily pervasive in the computer science. With open source and all that, there is collaboration, and there is, mutual sort of goals that are being lived out through the open source community. But one of the dreams I have is to see what happens when we take these CTO types and people who are building technology and building business, when they start collaborating, when they start sharing passions and have the same desired outcomes in society, what levels of innovation are we going to see when that starts happening?
Oh, yeah. I think we're already starting to see the early stages of it. In the events that we're starting to create, and the opportunities we're starting to create for them to get together and collaborate, we're already seeing places where they're getting together now on their own and saying, teach me this and help me to understand that. And, let me share with you something that I just learned over here. And the belief in the context is not one of scarcity, but one of abundance. So yeah, they're still, paying attention to being smart business people, and they're still protecting their assets, but their overall context is there's so much more for us to do. There's so much more for us all to learn, and we're just at the beginning, the tip of the iceberg here, and how exciting it is, all the things that are going to unfold in the future. And in that context, it's so much easier to take a collaborative approach rather than a competitive scarcity approach. And I think it's also fueled and accelerated by some of the tenets of agile and fail fast and turning failure on its head and having it be one of your greatest tools instead of one of your greatest fears also lends to this sense of, as long as I'm learning, as long as I'm growing, as long as you're learning, and as long as you're growing, we're all going to win in this field of experience that we're creating. So it's to me, it's one of the most exciting places to be in business.
Yeah, no,
right
we've
now.
definitely had we've had a fun couple of years now.
Yeah, yeah, and as you know, it's like I'm just getting more excited the farther we go down this path.
What do you think CEOs need to know about CTOs? It's a topic that we're very focused on, the CTO's role as a first-class citizen of the C-suite. What we've learned over the years is that it's very much a journey that the CTO has to go on as well, in levels of ownership and authority and
communication.
Yep. But what do you think CEOs need to know about their technical team? And so what we didn't talk about is your current role as a founder of Possibilities, working with CEO networks and CEOs. Are there conversations around managing technical executives? And if you had to give some CEOs advice about CTOs, what would you say?
Well, one of the first things that I find myself saying is, at first glance, it looks like you two live in different worlds. And what I want you to do is look deeper than that, because you have all these areas of shared interest and shared concern that you're just having a difficult time seeing at first glance. So one of them is that, unless I'm talking to a CEO who's a quote unquote professional CEO, not an entrepreneur, not a business builder, a CEO who's been brought in to oversee the maintenance of, or the smooth operations of an existing organization. Most other CEOs, because they are either have a little bit of the entrepreneurial spirit in them, or are charged with a growth phase in the business, they have a creative side to them. And the CTO can't be successful in their role without a creative side to them. And what makes the CTO role very fascinating to me is it's this very interesting combination of the strong analytical, disciplined mindset with the creative, inventive, innovative mindset. And it's the combination of those two that allows the CTO to truly manifest the opportunity that exists in the process of bringing new product to the marketplace. Well, the CEO can relate to that if we could figure out how to communicate and use language that was understandable to each other. And so the places that get us in trouble are, at the first level, are just communication techniques and communication patterns. CEOs, and I'm generalizing, but CEOs have a tendency to speak in bullet points and short phrases. And
when will it be done? How much is it going to cost?
Exactly. And and this is the problem. It can easily be solved by one or two or three levers. So let's just tell me which lever to pull, and I'll go make that happen. And the CTO wants you to understand all the things behind the scenes that have to be measured, understood, manipulated, worked on in order to make that happen. And so, talking in bullet points instead of talking at a level of complexity and nuance is very difficult for the CTO. And so right off the bat, the two of them are already at a disadvantage in their ability to discover where they're on the same page.
That is interesting because the dreaded "it depends" or I need more context. I guess that's the CTO's natural response then to the bullet-pointed conversations.
Yeah. the typical scenario, the CEO comes back from a conference and says, "Oh my God, I'm so excited. We need to have a new AI bot in our product. And, by the way, we don't want to be behind. We want to be ahead. So can you get that done in 6 months?" And the CTO, emotionally is having this experience of panic, which is probably showing up as judgment, anger, and frustration. And again, in the emotional intelligence world, how do I control that and see, what's underneath my experience of frustration? Oh my God, he just doesn't understand. He has no clue what this is going to take. Why do I have to be in this position? And get underneath that to, what do we have in common? What's his intention? An AI bot would be a wonderful thing. So how do I how do I get to the place where I can join with my CEO and say, God, what an exciting idea. Let me go do a little bit of exploration and figure out what it might take for us to look at going down that path. Now they've connected with each other emotionally and even conceptually at a high level, and the CTO has gotten an agreement to get some time to go through their own process now of figuring out, okay, not can this be done, but what would it take to even attempt to get this done? And now I've got enough time to go back and say, okay, here are some of the things that, either collectively or you as the CEO are going to have to do some risk management on, because in order to actually take us down that path, we're going to have to, reorganize our resources, reorganize our roadmap, hire some new missing resources, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it's that initial panic that actually gets in our way of being able to find a way for the two of us to understand each other and work through the process.
Michael, Saul, helping CTOs around the world grow in their leadership, innovation. What is there a parting thought that you have as we say goodbye? Like, what is there something that you've read recently, or something that you are currently sort of is top of mind that you feel is a little nugget that you can leave with us? I have one.
Go.
I recently realized that it's better to have an open heart than a closed heart.
Wow.
Even with someone that you might really have a problem with.
Yeah.
It's always better to be open to discussion, to negotiation, to processing than it is to say, you're dead to me, or I will show my displeasure by withholding an audience with you.
Wow.
That's a big one.
I love that. I would build on that by just saying, be authentic. There's really nothing to fear. We're going to have X amount of time on this planet. Make good use of it.
Or on other planets.
Or in other realities. Oh man, I can't wait. Podcast number 2.
Thank you, Michael. Well, we'll have your contact information in the show notes, and we will talk a lot more about this stuff in the months to come.
Awesome. Thanks for the opportunity.
Have you chatted with a CTO lately?